public meeting, right?
Testing again. I want to see. Right, my check. 1, 2, test.
Because these were from C to J. Yeah, right.
You mind if I ask you your name? You mind if I ask you your name?
Oh, it's for them. Tell them SK News.
SK News.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop recording.
Right here, look. No.
How you doing, man?
You doing all right? Yes, sir.
I'm gonna go.
How are you? See you. What's this guy's name?
You'd have to ask him.
Got you. I got you.
You have to ask
It's
him. Yeah.
I want to pick your brain. Find out. The other part is, point of order, the government doesn't allow us. It's our First Amendment right. And Texas statute says, 552.2 says that you have to.
How are you? What's your name?
Manuel.
Daniel? Hey, pleased to meet you, Joe Bennett.
Okay, nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you on the bat.
Thank you.
So I learned a lot here. So the order that they go in is the order that people sign up.
You do this often? You film public meetings?
Yeah, I started to.
Yeah?
I normally like film police officers,
Yeah?
like traffic stops and stuff like that. But going to my city council meetings and county meetings, I learned a lot, like as far as what they're doing when people don't know. So I started getting involved in all type of things, and they told me about this place. And the way they treated him yesterday, I seen that video and I didn't like it.
You know, one thing that this entity doesn't have is someone to videotape and then actually put that meeting online.
Yeah.
Do you do that kind of stuff?
Yes.
So you basically could film this meeting
Yeah.
and then put it online for the public.
Right now it's live on
it's live
YouTube.
right now? Right
On
now?
YouTube. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say something about that today.
Okay.
That's a good service.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing this entity lacks is accountability and transparency. You can type in any entity and actually watch your meetings live except for this entity. I wonder why. But anyway, I'm going to suggest that today.
Okay. Charlie Dog 84, what's the deal? Appreciate you being here.
Some people don't need podium or.
Yeah, some people are like finalists in the World Championship of Public Speaking, and they might be extremely capable, unless they have a law enforcement officer who's threatening to trespass.
It was only one page, but it's okay, I've got it. Same paper, appreciate that. Thank you. All right. And, okay, no podium. I got you. Thank you. I'm gonna run the rest of them up there. I'm back. Mr. Mott, seen your videos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so you know what's here then, right?
I do.
Well, make sure you tell your employees, man.
Right.
Yeah, inform them who I am. That way they don't do nothing out of character, man.
No. I'm Chandler Crowley.
Oh, hey, Mr.
Oh, you don't even work here.
No.
Okay. Nice to meet you,
Good to
man.
meet you.
I like what you do, sir.
Well, thanks.
I appreciate you helping the less fortunate, man.
Oh man, well that's what
We
it's all
need more
about.
people like you, man.
Yeah.
I don't agree with what they're trying to do to you here, man. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
No.
All right.
I applaud people like you, and I don't like corruption, people that use their office to limit the ability of a free person's choice to do what they want to do. And yours is helping people that are less fortunate to keep their homes.
That's my intention.
Yeah. And it's crazy that you have to go through this doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Now, if you were scamming them, taking money from them, hey, that would have high-fived you.
Well, I don't know, man.
No, I do.
Hey, I appreciate your support, and
Yeah.
man, I'm gonna run to the restroom. And
Go ahead, man.
I'll be back.
Do your thing.
Thank you very much.
No, I thought he worked here. I was gonna.
I'm his assistant.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate the work y'all doing, man. It means a lot to people like me.
Yeah.
It gives us a fighting chance to keep our homes.
Well, I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah. So, yeah. So here we are today. I just met the man that we're here to support and give back up to, because Mr. Crouch is doing something a lot of lawyers can do but refuse to do, because there has to be a point where you have to start looking at the citizens, your clients, more than the green dollars you're going to get. A person's right, a person's liberty, and a person's property shouldn't be at jeopardy because a person's worried more about money and making these people happy. So that's not what I'm cool with, and especially the First Amendment, his right to do this.
Hanging out with this guy.
Patrick Lewis, know my rights. Dana Judd.
You'll be back and she can be back here.
Okay. Well,
That's up to y'all. I don't mind sitting in the car with them.
no, I don't mind either. I think it'd be good because I've got some papers and I just want them to be handy. So,
There you go.
if you don't mind.
No, that's good. Do you want to move your camera up?
This is a lot more intimate than what we're used to.
Go ahead.
Really? For probably over 20 years. What were they doing back then?
We had a department in there, we had the data services department back there, and then we made changes, switched things around, and started making it as a purpose training slash.
I like the upgrade. Put that sheet of paper. This is mine.
Last name?
Find out.
Mine?
Your last name?
Mata, M-A-T-A.
How are you? I think.
No, you're good. They already said you're a good dude. You hear me? I said the people said you're a good dude.
And I try.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. Yeah, I appreciate that, man.
Look at it.
Checking in right now with the radio.
I'm just gonna close, there's a lot of noise coming in. I'm just gonna, I don't wanna close right away. I just wanna close this.
We got a timer here. You want me to turn it, we'll turn it around. That would be wonderful. Okay, we put it on his phone. Yeah, of course, okay. Is everything on? It's ready, okay. Good morning, everyone, and I will call our meeting to order, on June the 10th, 2022. Thank you all for being here, and at this time, can you verify our quorum? And we'll do our pledges, and then we'll have our. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
Thank you. And, well, I tell you, would you remain standing, because we're going to ask one of our employees, Mr. Brad Patrick, who's, yeah, he's going to do the prayer. He's the director of business personnel, and he is a youth minister and teaches at Precious Bank Temple in Lake Worth. So, Brad, would you just kind of come up here and lead us in prayer?
Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning, and we thank you for each person that is here. We pray that you'll extend your mercy and your blessings to each one of them, whether they're here as an observer or as a participant in the meeting. We pray, Lord, for this board. We pray that you'll watch over each member. Your word says in 1 Timothy to pray for our leaders, and we hold each one of them up, Lord. We pray that you'll bless them and bless their families. And we pray that you'll extend your wisdom and your knowledge to each one of them. As we go through this agenda today, Lord, we pray that you'll just help them to accomplish the task that they have before them. We pray that you'll extend that wisdom and that mercy, the wisdom and knowledge to the chief appraiser and the staff here, Lord. We pray that you'll help us to continue to strive to do the best that we can, and help us to always look to learn more and to do better. And we pray, Lord, that above all this, for both the staff and the board, we pray that you'll help us to remember the example by your son of how to be a servant. We pray that you'll help us to always serve to the best of our ability the property owners, their representatives, and the taxing entities here in Tarrant County. And finally, Lord, we pray that you'll help us to always remember the small things, things such as this meeting today, Lord. there are places in this world where meetings like this cannot happen. We're thankful that we live in this country, in this state, where we can have meetings such as this, where we can have open discussion, where we can have agreements and disagreements, but that we can do it in a civil manner, and we can do it and show our brotherly love to each other through the agreements and the disagreements. And we thank you for all this, and we ask all this in your son's blessed name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So now, the next order is recognition of visitors and public comment. And the first person I have on the list is Thomas Gerald. Is that
Correct.
Gerald?
Gerald? Yeah,
Gerald, okay, I couldn't,
common
it's
name.
kinda, I couldn't read the, okay.
It's my handwriting.
Okay, well, you want to turn it around so you can see at the timer, and you're ready.
I'll start, you start.
All right.
No, we don't.
Madam Chair, board members, taxpayers, and fellow citizens, I really appreciate, first of all, that we get to celebrate and exercise all 5 of our First Amendment rights this morning. Freedom of religion. Back a lady at the 7-Eleven across the street prayed for Mr. Mata and I before we came here to see truth and to protect us, given our experience yesterday. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to redress our grievances. And this is freedom of the press. All 330 million Americans are members of the press, made more so by the Fifth Circuit decision that people across the country can film government officials in the course of their duties, as well as law enforcement, like Mr. Thomas in the back room. I want to make a couple points about the First Amendment because I think that the entire staff here needs to be completely retrained on civil rights and specifically the First Amendment. If you watched the video that I made here yesterday, there were more than 24 employees that violated my First Amendment rights. And Deputy Thomas, who's on his best behavior this morning, literally physically assaulted me and shoved me out the door. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people have already seen the video. Separately, for Mr. Ricardo over here, and a number of other staffers to go in the back room and come back and forth to conspire on how to keep me out of publicly accessible spaces is a violation of Title 18 USC 341 and 342, deprivation of rights under the color of law. As public officials and as public employees, you have a certain level of immunity. And law enforcement has a higher level of immunity until they exercise prior restraint, which is specifically what Officer Deputy Thomas done. There are a number of things that are troubling here, including the fact that your individual public hearings, while they be in small rooms, are open public hearings. It literally says on the door that anyone can walk in, sit down quietly and observe or record the session. That is the law. The law, that overriding law for this board and for this county is the United States Constitution, not the policies or rules or procedures that are attempted to be implemented by the staff. The other thing that I want to point out is that in that video, you will clearly see a number of employees lie or construe things or omit things purposely to stall the public from getting answers when they walk in the door. There'll be more on the First Amendment a little bit later. I want to make sure everyone understands that I'm happy to be here for the first time, but this hasn't been a thing that's happened only at this governmental body. The county as a whole, the city of Fort Worth, the Tarrant Regional Water District, Ms. Burgess knows that the ability to exercise your free speech and sometimes utter controversial speech, things that you don't like, is not only protected, it is a God-given right that we were born with. The last point in my 3 minutes is wait until it's time to talk about Mr. Crouch.
Next speaker will be Mr. Chandler Crouch.
Ready when you are.
I'm gonna wait for you to start talking now.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so I saw that there's an item on the agenda today addressing the letter that I provided to the board, or actually that my attorney sent to the board the day before the last board meeting. Up to this point, there haven't been a lot of details. I haven't shared details about that, what's going on, the merits of that, what the letter addresses. I haven't shared details with many people at all, but certainly not with you guys. So I just want to give you a little bit of context here. So back in October of 2021, somebody started filing several complaints against my license as a property tax consultant. The complaints were filed through the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and the complaints allege all sorts of things. And I just want to say first, just to make it very clear, because I'm going to entertain a different viewpoint here in a minute. I just want to make it very clear. What's in the complaint is absolutely baseless. It is. I'm trying to measure my words. I'm just going to tell you what I think. It's crazy. It seems it's highly emotional. It's crazy, and it demonstrates in the complaints. If you just read the complaints, that I'm absolutely innocent of everything being accused. In the facts, all you have to do is read it. Now, beyond that, I just want to say this. When I first got the complaint, I thought it was bogus because it was so crazy. It was obvious that whoever wrote it didn't really know the property tax code. It was highly emotional. There were just wild accusations all over the place, and I didn't know whether to take it serious or not. So I'm going to pause right there because I think that the reason why this matters of concern to you guys is because of who filed the complaint. There's a real question as to who filed that complaint. Was it the Tarrant Appraisal District? Was it somebody? Was it Randy Armstrong? How much does Jeff Law support this complaint? Those are questions that I feel like are a matter that you guys might want to know about, and I've got plenty of documentation here. I can provide a lot of details on this. I'm happy to cooperate fully. I talked to my attorney about speaking here today. I said, hey, do you feel like you need to come and speak on my behalf or whatever? And he said, you know what, this is more than anything, there's a free speech issue at hand, and you guys need to talk. He said, if there's something that crosses a couple of lines, then you might not answer the questions and bring the questions in. But I'm here with the, whatever. I don't want to say permission, but understanding the attorney. All right. So here's what I have to say about this. I want to make these during public comments because I'm not sure these will be allowed during the discussion later. You guys are leaders, and I assume that you're here because you want to make a difference. The only thing that I can imagine would stand in your way of standing up to do what's right is the question that you might have on whether or not there's something in that complaint that shows that I'm guilty of something. And here's what I want to say. Regardless if I'm guilty or if I'm innocent, we have a problem. Let me explain. If I'm guilty, then what's happened is I've been protesting over the last 5 years, filed over 60,000 protests. There's an army of people in this building that have participated in helping me resolve the protests. Here are the protests, people in the ARB, all over the place. There wasn't a complaint filed until October. If I'm guilty in this, there are an army of people in here that are guilty as well, and there's a big problem if somebody didn't speak up until this complaint was filed. So if I'm guilty, we have a problem, and I believe it's of concern to the board. If I'm innocent, then what that means is we have a big problem. And the only question that I have, if I'm innocent, is what is the Tarrant Appraisal District okay with? Are they okay with the fact that somebody filed that complaint knowingly? Or did Mr. Law know that this complaint was filed? Is he okay with it being filed? What's been done to show who's filing this complaint? I've got a lot of details, can't get into it right now. I've got a lot of questions. What's okay? How many other people have complaints been filed on like this?
Mr. Krause, your time is almost done.
Yeah, it's valuable seconds here. Have you seen the complaint? Who's seen the complaint? Is it common for employees of the appraisal district to file a complaint against the public, or do those complaints always represent the appraisal district? Do you have any policy regarding employees filing complaints using county assets, county resources in order to do so? How do you feel about the fact that, there are a lot of questions there. I'm going to pause right there. I've got so much to say, so much I'd love to cooperate on, and I will sit down now. Thank you.
All right. Next, Mr. Daniel Bennett.
Yes, ma'am, before I get up and speak, I wanted clarification. I spoke to Mr. Tepper before the meeting started. I know you're revamping your employee policy where you're gonna have public comments for non-agenda items, and then we'll be able to speak on each item as it comes up. I have 3 items I wish to speak to, and I have some public comments. Would you like me to do them all in 5 minutes, or follow the recommendation of the attorney that made back on March 13th? What's the chair's wishes?
Okay, may I refer to our attorney,
So-
Mr. Tepper, that you spoke to,
Board
please?
policy, not employee policy.
Okay, yeah.
I guess it's 2 things. One, the board policy is actually on the agenda today to get approved. So I think as it sits today, we're still operating under the prior rules that we've been operating on. The other thing is, I think, and I'll double check it here when we get to take it out, but I think that we actually changed, there was a draft version of the policy that was discussed at the last full meeting, where we talked about possibly breaking down public comment on each individual item. But I think the one that is before you all to be approved today has all the public comment being in the front, including whatever topics. But I will double check that before that agenda item comes in.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was gonna say, but I wanted Mr. Tepper to answer for me, and because he's written.
I appreciate the
And we haven't, and I agree, we haven't voted on it yet, it hasn't been established as.
Well, it's the wish, it's the pleasure of the chair, that's why I asked.
Oh, okay. thank
Okay,
you.
my name's Daniel Bennett. I'd like to speak, well, actually, I have a guy here named Mr. Mata, he's filming today, which is totally unexpected. Obviously, I think he said it was live. So I looked him up online, and that's something this body has failed to have forever. You can go to Fort Worth, you can't, I think you used to be able to go to White Sullivan until they canceled their cable contract, where you can actually watch their meetings. So when you do your budget today, when you talk about, it was inserted in case you wanted to add something, add a line item in your budget portion for live streaming of your meetings. This is probably costing Mr. Mata $10,000 a day to be here. No, I'm just being facetious. It's apparently, this body has never had the will, or, as I would say, the capacity to do this. And this is how simple it is. Matter of fact, put an RFP out. I'm sure maybe Mr. Mata would like to respond to an RFP and do what he's doing today for the benefit of the public. That's all I got to say to that. I would like to address Mr. Chandler. I'd like to speak to Chandler letter written to the board by Frank Hill. Mr. Hill is the managing director of Hill Gilstrap PC, beginning his career as a Justice Department lawyer in Washington, D.C. His experience in the Justice Department established a foundation for litigating the most sophisticated disputes. Upon moving to Texas, Frank began litigating cases in both the state and federal courts, and his superior attorney skills have brought his clients victory after victory. Mr. Hill has been designated a super lawyer by attaining high degree of peer recognition and decades of professional achievement. Mr. Hill has recently filed a suit against TCC for failure to follow due process and dismissing employees. The Chancellor of Tarrant County College has been dismissed since the submission of the suit on behalf of Christine Bennett, not related to me, as plaintiff. Mr. Hill summed up the issues confronting dismissed employees at Tarrant County College in the Fort Worth Report online publication. You can read it. Hill agrees that Bennett's fight and his decades of work against TCC is bigger than he and his clients. At the end of the day, the college is costing taxpayers money. Mr. Bennett's case, the college has already spent more than $50,000 for a law firm conducting an investigation, with the potential that the cost could increase to $200,000. I ask this board to act swiftly and to act expeditiously in a manner before the taxi units are put potentially in financial harm's way. Okay, also I'd like to address the chief appraiser comments from May 13th. You had 3 items, and Mr. Law added a 4th item. Some type of award that, you know, we pay these people to review documents and they give us an award. It was on May 13th. You may want to go review the audio, Mr. Papa. That's a violation of the meetings act. He can't add anything under that line item. He did. I'm just pointing that out. And in the future, I hope he doesn't practice that. The revamp of public comments, Mr. Tepper just covered that. I kind of like the original draft, but we're all going to do it up front. We still should be able to speak to that item if there's questions. So if I speak to Mr. Chandler and said, Mr. Bennett, well, where'd you get that information? I should be able to share it with the board. It's right off Gilstrap's website. Okay, and I appreciate what you did today, Ms. Wallman. I not often I compliment you, but you addressed Mr. Patrick as head of business personal property, not director, because directors are up here. Head of departments are here. I appreciate that designation, you clarifying that to the staff. Oh, that's all. Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Monitor for being here. This is pretty awesome. Thank you.
I believe that concludes our public comment, and we'll move on to the action items. The action item under A is the consent agenda items, and they are, you want to read those?
Yes, ma'am. The first one would be action item regarding approval of the minutes from the May 13th meeting and the May 27th meeting. And then the second consent agenda item would be authorizing the chief appraiser to negotiate an agreement for communication and marketing services. And this is the item that the board put in the budget last year for this year to engage a communications consultant.
Anybody want, is there anything you'd like to take off to discuss, or do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Okay, second. Mr. Jordan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passed. We are now down to discussion items and the budget workshop follow-up, and there's
The adoption of the policy amendment.
oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought this was under the consent agenda.
No, it's not. It's an action item.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misread it. We want to, item B, 6B, deliberate and act on adoption of Tyrants Appraisal District Board of Directors Policy Manual. Oh, yeah, I sure did. Policy manual. I'm sure that everyone has, we've talked about, we've looked at, do you have some discussion on it?
I just want to ask the attorney, who's now looking at me. The last version that we had was highlighted. I'm assuming this is not changed from the highlighted set. As you clarified, I think there's one item, the time of speech is 5 minutes.
Yes.
And there was some clarification of those items. Is there anything else changed?
There were a handful of changes, but all of them were based on the discussions that we had at the prior regular meeting where it was discussed. And so those have been the only changes that were made were things that the board specifically asked to put in there in the last meeting.
Thank you.
Please ask her this.
Discussion?
Okay, because before you vote on this, the new policy is already on the agenda, which is my point. Staff posted the
I'm
policy.
taking,
I'm just consider it, Aggies don't like lying and cheating. Right, and so they've already put this as policy
May I
on
ask
the
a
agenda.
question of the attorney that can we take, according to
They're
law,
railroading the public.
may we take comments from or questions from public on this item?
Right now, you've already closed out the public comment portion of the meeting, and so now the meeting is with the board. And so if y'all want to have additional items or have input, y'all can, but if you do not wish to have it, it is time for the board to discuss issues.
Madam Chairman, I'd
Yes.
like to point out, we had a lengthy discussion about this at the last meeting, and I'm not exactly sure what the concern is regarding that, but I think we thoroughly went through all of the changes and really the whole document. So that is a matter of record that we did at the last hearing,
yes.
which would have been a good time for, it was on the agenda
Yeah,
to discuss
there's
in the last
comments,
meeting.
yes.
So, I think we can go on.
Okay, so do we have a motion to accept and act on this?
So moved.
Mr. Conklin moves to pass and act on the adoption of the board of directors policy manual. Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Board. That was a big one, and it was one that we had worked on for a long time. And it's good to have a policy. And thank you, Mr. Pepper, for all your help in putting it together. Well, we are now down.
If I could point out, one of the discussion points at the last was whether to reduce the public speaking time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. And I'm pleased that the board kept it to 5 minutes. You don't have, usually have very minutes for people and it's good to hear from the public. So,
Yeah, it's good. It's debatable. Some do 3, some do 5, and that's fine, because most of our speakers take 5, and that's fine. Okay, and thank you, and thank all the board members for the work you've done on this, because it's been a while in the making. Okay, we get to discussion items and budget workshop follow-up. Any action on that?
No, there will be no action on this. Really, we put this item back on the agenda for discussion purposes. We obviously had a budget workshop on our May 27th meeting. Went through the entire budget. This was basically an opportunity for the board to come back and give us further input. Any other discussion? Jeff does have some information we can share with you on kind of what other appraisal districts are doing, if you're interested in that, and kind of where we stand compared to the other appraisal districts. Would you like to hear that? So Jeff, would you kind of report?
Yeah.
Would you report on that stuff we looked at about kind of where we are on a price per parcel, and then what the other appraisal districts around us are doing as far as their proposed increases in their budgets?
Sure, yeah, I'd be glad to. Jeff Craig, Director of Administration. Just as a comparison on the large, we talked about the fact that there are a group of large appraisal districts that are very similar to us, and there's kind of a second tier of appraisal districts, and there are our neighboring districts. Of the large tier, based on the proposed 2023 proposed budgets, I've just broken that down on a per parcel basis, just on cost, just as a comparison. And of the group, there are 6 in this group. And we are the next to the lowest in terms of parcel cost. Harris Appraisal District has the most parcels. They've got over 1.5 million parcels. Their budget is just under $100 million proposed for 2023, and their cost per parcel is $65.17 a parcel. So for every parcel, their appraisal cost annually is $65.17. Travis Appraisal District, Austin, they've got 473,000 parcels, 471,000 some odd parcels. Their parcel cost, based on their 2023 proposed, is $53.80 per parcel. El Paso CAD has the lowest number of parcels of this group, 405,000 parcels. Their per parcel cost is $49.09 per parcel. Dallas Appraisal District, our close neighbor, 745,000 parcels. Their per parcel cost is $41.84 per parcel. And then we would be in the next position. And this is only based on our real estate parcels, 686,000 some odd parcels. We're at $40.99 at the proposed budget that we presented at the workshop. And that does not include the 1.1 million mineral accounts that we've got kind of unique from the other districts, obviously. And then Bearcat is the lowest, and their parcel count is 692, very similar parcel count to us. And their per parcel cost is $34.20 right now on their proposed budget. So that would be just kind of a per parcel comparison. Kind of in that group, the proposed budget that we presented back on the 27th would be for 2023 would be $28,631,389. That is a $1,841,272 change, but it's a 6.87% change. So that's kind of the comparative number, is the percent of increase. We, in that proposed budget, are proposing 2 additional staff members. So I listened to an hour and a half or so of Denton CAD's board budget workshop that they held last week or so, and then I've gotten information from the other larger appraisal districts and neighboring appraisal districts to give you an idea of what they are proposing to do for 2023. Travis Appraisal District is proposing a $2.5 million, a little over $2.5 million increase, and that is an 11.28% increase versus our 6.87. Bear Appraisal District is proposing a $3.4 million increase in their budget. It would be a 16.98% increase in their budget. They are proposing 19 additional staff members as well in theirs versus, 2 in ours, but 19 in theirs. And they've also restructured salaries. They had a third-party outside salary study done this year, and they've restructured some salaries as we've done that as well in ours from our salary study that we talked about in our budget workshop. This kind of validates the fact that that's what the market is showing out there. Denton Appraisal District is proposing a $3 million, a little over $3 million increase, and that's going to vary. Let me explain that. Their original proposed budget that they presented to their board was a 20% increase. They had an outside consultant come in and do a study also of personnel and salaries, and their consultant recommended that they add 28 positions to their budget. They didn't add 28, they added 18. They're proposing 18. 8 of those are appraisers. They proposed a director of administration, a director of appraisal, a couple of GIS technical folks, and then 8 residential appraisers, and then some customer service folks. But their board had some concern, just as you did. Your anxiety a little bit over the Senate Bill 2 effects and that sort of thing. And they came back and asked staff to look at a couple of changes, and they did. And they removed the cost of living adjustment for retirees that they had in their budget. They do one of those every year. We only do it every third year. They were unusual in doing it every year, so they pulled that out, and they pulled a couple of other things out, and it brought their increase from 20% down to about 18%. So I didn't recalculate what that dollar amount, so it's going to be a little bit under that $3 million number. Collin Appraisal District, they're proposing a $2.7 million increase to their budget, which would be a 10.65% increase, and they're adding 6 additional full-time staff and 2 additional part-time staff in theirs. Harris Appraisal District, again, they're just under $100 million. They're just a different animal from us in a lot of ways as far as size, just in scope, in terms of scope. But their increase would be a $4.6 million increase, a 4.88% increase. Dallas Appraisal District, they're on a different budget cycle than we are. They're on a June 1 cycle instead of January 1 cycle, so their budget kind of overlaps ours a little bit. Their current budget they're in overlaps us a little bit, but in their proposed 2022-2023 budget, they're proposing about a $1.8 million increase or a 6.41% increase. So very similar to us as far as what they're proposing. One of the things that I think I sensed a little bit of your concern, not a little bit, but concern on your part and a little anxiety about what will be the effects of Senate Bill 2 on budgets generally for those that support us. And so we did a little research. We just wanted to make sure we understood too kind of what potential impact that would be. And I think one of the questions are, the impact would be on their property tax revenue, obviously. And for other entities that support us, property tax revenue is not their entire revenue. So it wouldn't be an effect on their entire revenue. So we were trying to get an idea of how much revenue do the various entities get from property taxes versus other revenue sources. And so there's a couple ways to look at that. We've done the best we can looking at their budgets and their revenue sources. But we just looked at kind of a selected group. We looked at the city of Arlington, city of Colleyville, city of Fort Worth, city of Keller, town of Pantego, city of Southlake, Arlington ISD, Fort Worth ISD, Grapevine, Colleyville ISD, and then Tarrant County. And we knew that some of those were some that you'd be very familiar with. And when we looked at city of Arlington, depending on whether you look at general fund revenues or total revenues, when you look at total revenues, property tax makes up 31.3% of their total revenues. For Colleyville, it's 32.5%. For Fort Worth, it's 29%. For Keller, 25.6%. Town of Pantego, 35.2%, and then city of Southlake, 26.7%. For school districts, it's going to be more, obviously. 64% for Arlington School District, 62.5 for Fort Worth, and then 84.8 for Colleyville, Grapevine Colleyville. For the county, about 78% for that. And that was looking at total revenues. We just looked at general fund revenues. Those were a little bit different, just slightly higher, ticks up slightly higher in each one of those. But that's the amount of revenue that will be affected by the Senate Bill 2 changes. When we went through all of those other revenues for the other entities that support us, we did try to look at what are the kinds of revenues that they have other than property tax. And so, just to list some of the ones: franchise taxes, fees, licenses and permits, fines and forfeitures, charges for services, development fees, ambulance revenue in some cases, hotel tax, rental income, utility charges, TIF district taxes, intergovernmental contracts, miscellaneous interest. So those were some that cities had in their budgets to varying degrees. School districts, local tax penalties and interest, tuition and fees, gate receipts, athletic event entry fees, participation fees, extended care program, field trip revenue, rents and building use fees, TIF reimbursement, sales, real personal property, bond sales. So depending on the school district, some of those had those different revenues in them. And then the county licenses, fees of office, cash fines, investment income, operating grants, capital grants, and things like that. And I think the point really is that we really have one source of revenue that you're having to deal with, and our source of revenue is just that one source. And so that's a little different for us than for them. The other thing I did look at too that probably is of interest is that one of the things that won't be affected by the limitation would be new construction, whatever they would get in the way of new construction. And so just looking at that same group, City of Arlington, based on our initial estimates, would add about 1.42% for new construction. Colleyville, 0.98%, City of Fort Worth, 2.78%, City of Keller, 1.2%, Town of Pantego, 0.24%, about 0.25%, City of Southlake, 1.59%, Arlington ISD, 0.57%, I'm sorry, Fort Worth, 2.13%, and Grapevine Colleyville, 0.75%, and in the county, a little over 2%. So I know I ran through those quickly, but those would be in addition to the property tax revenue that they would be getting that would be limited by the Senate Bill 2. And I think that's all kind of the facts and figures. I thought maybe since we didn't have that at the budget workshop, and it would help you put a little bit in context about what we were asking you guys to do.
Could you give us that piece of paper, that data? And you mentioned the percentage of property taxes in the total budget, and I think you said for Fort Worth it was 29%.
If you look at it based on total revenues for City of Fort Worth was 29%. If you looked at it on the basis of just general fund, which would be a more limited fund, it would be 57% of your general fund.
If you could give us that, certainly without acting today.
Good. Anybody else?
Just a quick question on the ratios. Obviously, personnel is our biggest cost, right? And so at 77% of our total revenue. Have you made some comparison with other counties or other entities like ours, about the same size, and what their expense is on
the personnel side?
The personnel side.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. It ranges somewhere between 70 to as high as 80, somewhere in that range, especially for the larger ones. Well, actually, for some of the smaller ones, it can be a little bit higher depending on the district, but for the larger that are similar to us, it's in that same range. Just, we're people heavy business.
And then the other one that kind of jumped out at me was on the legal side. On the legal side, do you think that we are around in terms of our percentage of spend similar to other counties? Are we spending more on legal line or less?
It's very similar.
Real similar all the way across.
Okay. All in scale to the size of the budget, but
It depends on the size of the appraisal district. I mean, really.
That's what I'm saying with appraisal districts similar to ours. I'm not going to compare ourselves to, a little, small district. Obviously, Houston is kind of out there.
Harris is really high. I can't find that number, but it's really high. But as a percentage of their $100 million budget, very similar.
Okay. All right.
Good. Any other questions? Comments?
The comment, the percentage is based on values. So if the county has a higher average value of parcels, then the percentage of cost is going to be lower.
I'm not sure I followed. So you're saying the per parcel cost
If
is
the
higher?
if the inventory, if you have a higher inventory cost value, then you take the cost of what it is to run the appraisal district. The higher the value, the lower the percentage of the cost.
But in the numbers that he gave you, El Paso is trending higher than we are on a per parcel basis, but I would probably argue to say that their overall appraised value is probably less. It's
Well,
definitely less than ours.
My initial impression is it's a false comparison.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of where I think that's where I'm at. I'm not sure that comparison is. And kind of one of the things that's been really interesting is that Travis County, because they've had the highest spike in values in real estate, they have a smaller parcel count than me, but their value has really grown.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and but it's kind of like, I guess it's maybe the scale of the house. You have one kitchen in a house, and it's, as the square footage of the house gets bigger, the kitchen kind of stays roughly the same. I think that's kind of the analogy you would, there's an economy of scale, in other words.
It's valuable to have a look at,
Yeah.
but it's not all encompassing.
It's not, and a major lawsuit that cost more than expected in one county, like that number too. We've got a contingency amount out there, like $100,000 contingency that we've talked about, that if we were to have to pay, one legal fee on one particular case, might take all that $100,000. So that's where we get into that crystal ball.
It's good to look at.
Yeah.
It's somewhat apples and oranges.
Yeah, historically, appraisal districts from the very beginning always would compare parcel count, or well, how much are you spending per parcel? And so that was just kind of a common way to look at it. So Jeff just took the opportunity to go ahead and say, well, how does our budget look now? I think it's less, they use that number less these days, but back in the 1900s, it was very common to say, what's your parcel, per parcel cost of your budget?
It's a good comparison
Yes.
to look at, it's just not necessarily what you're basing the decision.
Right. And that's why I had Jeff go ahead and look at what's the percentage of increases of pretty much all of our accompanying and neighboring counties, similar counties to us. I guess technically outside of Herrick, we would rank the third from the bottom. And there's actually a lot of smaller appraisal districts that are doing that 18, 19, 20% too. Montgomery County, I think we talked last time. Montgomery County had originally imposed at 23.8% of their total budget. Yeah, and then the commissioners of Montgomery County came back and said, I think we need to trim that back some.
Yeah, I had Montgomery, we talked about before. I had a few others that we knew about. They weren't these larger neighboring ones necessarily, but El Paso was in the group. El Paso is proposing a 10% increase. Grayson, 20%, and 6 additional staff members. Hood, 7%. Montgomery was 23.8. Bastrop, 22.27. Culbertson, which is a fairly small county, 23% increase. So it's affecting all sizes of folks.
I guess just thinking about that and Senate Bill 2, when we charge the entities their taxes, right? I mean, that's how we have our revenue basically.
I charge them to collect their taxes. Yes, sir.
To provide the
Appraisal services, yes.
services all the way. And do we charge them a percent of their revenue, or is it a fixed cost and say, hey, City of Arlington, our fee for what we provide for you is gonna be X dollars?
Yeah, we we charge them based on the law, the way the law says it. And what it's done is it's based upon their percentage of the tax levy that they collect. We'll determine their total value times their tax rate, determine how much taxes they will ultimately collect. Then we determine what percentage of the grand total of all Tarrant County tax entities will collect. And that percentage based on levy collected, not collected, but levy to collect, is the percentage that we charge in this budget.
So we charge a percent,
Yes.
again, not a fixed amount.
Right.
So
Okay.
if their revenue goes down because of Senate Bill 2, then our revenue is also gonna go down by.
Well, no, it's just the percentages will change. If you adopt
So
this
we'll charge a
budget.
higher percentage, but still our revenue will be constant,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to figure out.
Right, it's an allocation based on that levy, so it'll be a percentage, and it's a long, multi-digit percentage. And then the static number will be the budget we propose, so that would
Okay,
be
so
taken.
even if they collect less because of Senate Bill 2,
Right.
we'd still be able to collect this to protect our budget, to make sure that we can make it.
Yes.
For this year, next year it'll be
Next year, maybe
it's a little different, but
To give
okay.
you an idea, historically, the city of Fort Worth and Fort Worth ISD have been our biggest contributors to the budget, and they've typically been around 10 to 11%. So of this budget, the largest share would be about 10% of the budget to one entity. Everybody else then participates in a smaller percentage, so.
I'm clear on that.
I guess as a final point that I would like to make is that we will be sending this budget to the taxing entities on June the 15th. The law says we have to submit it to the taxing entities, and we'll be doing that, so.
Good.
And then, as we talked about before, there'll be a formal budget hearing in August, and where there'll be an opportunity to speak, any entity can speak on the budget during that hearing, and you guys will then, at that point, actually approve the budget for 2023.
And Jeff, I do appreciate trying to compare it to other taxing entities, because, you know, otherwise, we can sit here and say, oh, we're only spending this much on this part, but without seeing what other entities that are similar to us are doing, it's hard to get to figure out whether it's appropriate or not. We talked about a little bit about, you know, sometimes you can be very frugal and it's good, and sometimes you can be frugal and it's not good, to the point that you're losing people and things like that. You're not able to recruit and retain, you know, top level quality people. And so, again, being able to compare what we're doing across other entities gives us a better idea. I think we're in the right space. It's tough to do, but I think any effort that we make to do that is a good thing, so I appreciate that.
Good comments. I agree with you completely. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, since we have a couple of cameras here, I think this would be a great time to point out that TAD only appraises property. We don't set tax rates and we don't collect that.
Well,
That's right.
But this board does not discuss anything having to do with property values. That's completely out of, we don't talk about that. We talk about the budget and making sure that we're providing the services to the county citizens that we provide, but anything that has to do with value, I've never had any input on that whatsoever. Never had discussion with Mr. Law about property values, because that is beyond our purview here as a board for Tarrant appraisal districts.
Also, the fact that we do not take the ARV, those all the protests. The protests are all handled by ARV, not by this board.
It's not part of the agenda.
It's under, we are talking about the budget. It's part of the budget.
ARV's a budget. That's ARV. That's all.
ARV, yes.
Can we move on? Thanks,
Yes, we
Rich.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. We'll just move on.
It did come up, right?
Yeah, in fact, the next issue is the letter sent to the board regarding Mr. Crouch. And, since the board, we did get the letter, and I think we all got a copy of that letter, is that correct? Everybody is aware of it. I think the board has some discussion, and I have checked with our attorney, and, I would like to suggest for the board's discussion that there is also a problem with, or not necessarily a problem, but it also involves one of our employees. So I would like to suggest that we put it on for the next meeting under executive session, personnel issues. Mr. Tucker, would you like to?
I think if, it is a personnel issue, so, I think it definitely can qualify to go into executive session. So if that is how the board, would like to discuss it, I think that would be an appropriate thing to do.
Discussion?
Would I be invited to that meeting? Since it involves me?
So typically, the rule on executive session is that the people who get to come into executive session is obviously everybody who is a member of the board, and then anybody else that the board deems as being necessary for the discussion. If it's a personnel matter, and it has to do with an employee of the appraisal district, that particular employee also has a right to come into executive session, but anybody else that would come into executive session would end up being somebody that the board invited in. I would also suggest that if we are going to put this on for executive session, that we should probably post it not just for personnel, but also for anticipated litigation, because I did hear in the public comment, at least contemplated litigation against the appraisal district.
So we need to ask for legal.
Where did that comment come from? Who said that?
So we need to seek legal,
I would post it, I think I would post it that way.
Okay.
So.
That's just advice from the attorney.
So let me make sure I understand. It can go to litigation because it involves an employee. I'm sorry, executive session. And is Mr. Crouch, who's the subject of all of this, going to be invited to the executive session or not? I misunderstood.
So, and that is up to the board, as to whether you want to have him in there or not. If you do, and you can have him in there for part of it and not for other. The rule on who gets to come to executive session is any member of the board obviously gets to be in there. If it's under personnel, the employee that it is about gets to come in, and then the board can invite in other people who are necessary for the discussion that's going to take place.
Okay. Any comment?
I may have a question for legal then, and I guess it would be a legal question for our attorney.
Who threatened litigation?
I think I was still asking that.
I'm sorry, I
apologize.
Sorry, this is the board discussion, okay?
Yeah, I think I have a legal question, and I could ask it, I think, I'm not certain whether, is this and you can probably tell us in this, because I'm not trying to hide my question, is this a discussion about an employee, or is this an action by someone who happens to be an employee and they did it on their personal time? And I do not know.
I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
question.
Okay.
And that may be part of the
And
discussion.
I think only that individual would be able to, and I don't know if Jeff knows, I don't know if anyone knows, so I don't know that answer.
I think that we,
The next meeting is 2 months away.
yeah, it is.
And I'm not sure that a private conversation between the two individuals might not be appropriate as well. Discuss this then.
Wow.
That's what I think we need to discuss.
I mean, I think as of right now, it is unclear, and I think that's to Ms. Burgess's comment, as to whether this is a TAD issue or
But
not.
it does,
An
this is a board
personal
discussion,
issue.
excuse me, Mr. Chandler.
Exactly.
My name is on the agenda, I'm just raising my hand. I'm
Okay,
politely
good.
raising my hand,
Okay, thank you.
and my name is on the agenda.
I think it's appropriate for Mr. Chandler to be able to ask a question here and there. This is the board discussion we're having.
Yes, it is. And when you start adding in all the, the public comment, then we just get into a big, I think it's a different issue. But anyway,
So just to understand, there was a complaint against Mr. Crouch sent into a licensing board. That's got nothing to do with us, right? That's got nothing to do with us.
possibly.
It maybe was one of our employees I don't know that. But there's a chance that maybe it was a pet employee that filed that complaint. And I guess we need to discuss whether that involves us or not, because if they did it on their own time, that may be something then different than if they did it here or so. I guess that's a personnel
It's a
discussion,
personnel decision.
but the discussion then is gonna be whether that employee had a right to do something like that. It still doesn't have anything to do with the complaint that was filed against him. I don't know why we have
haven't
to get
seen the
involved in that complaint.
That's the point. We have not seen the complaint. We have not seen how it was signed, who signed it, or who did it, are we
Yeah.
involved in it? Those are things that are questions that I would like to do, it could be done in executive session, and there may be more to it. I mean, I haven't seen the complaint. No one, as far as I know, no one up here has seen it. And so we don't really know those questions, and that is what could be discussed in executive session. We could probably even, today, could we call an executive session? I guess not. No, we
Yeah,
can't,
I
it's
don't
not on the agenda.
think this is
No,
posted
no,
properly
okay.
to go ahead and have an executive session. in that
But
way.
I think there are some
So is
things.
that a yes or
No, that was a no, I don't think it is posted properly. to
No,
go
we
into
can't.
executive
I
session.
agree with that. I have a question for Mr. Chandler, though, and I'm wondering, there's nothing prohibiting, because he's speaking on the agenda item.
Can I ask one more question of the attorney before you talk to Mr. Costas?
Yeah.
So I've been in a lot of executive sessions in a prior board. We've never had somebody from the outside come and talk to us, even when it was an employee. It was an executive session, and then we went out and there was a session with the employee, and they could choose to whether they did it open or closed session there. In general, they did it closed because we're talking about personnel matters. So my question is, if Mr. Crouch has an attorney, if we were to invite him, would it be up to us whether we invite him with his attorney or him without the attorney? And he would just have to come in the way that we invited him?
Yeah, that is correct, for executive session. And there have to be, it's not just completely the unbridled discretion of the board. There would have to be a reason tied to why we were going into executive session that legitimizes that person.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I think what we're saying is our reason to go into executive session is gonna be pretty much just a personnel matter. Does the complaint involve somebody that works for TAD? And if it does, if it doesn't, then I feel like we don't have a lot to discuss at this point. But if it does, then we're looking at, is that within the policy that's acceptable for them to do as an employee of TAD?
No, you're right, Ronell, and I think the point, and that is obviously, there's been apparently a complaint that was filed against Mr. Crouch with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations. The Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations will deal with that complaint as they think is appropriate. That is what their job is to do. Certainly, the Tarrant Appraisal District did not file that complaint. Nobody at this board, my understanding is Mr. Law, that nobody that had the authority of the appraisal district to file the complaint did it. So really, in a sense, the complaint doesn't have anything to do with the board. And so I think what maybe I've heard some of the members say, what they want to know is, does the complaint have something to do with an employee? And maybe if it does, was it the employee acting within the course and scope of their employment? Or was it somebody who happens to work at the appraisal district who was just acting as a private citizen, exercising their rights for that? And I think some of those are things that some of the board members have indicated, we don't know the answer to. I'm not sure I know the answer to any of those questions yet.
Okay.
And is it our responsibility to take action on personnel items as a board, or does it go to the chief appraiser first and then go through that course prior, or does it?
No.
I've never dealt with personnel items on other boards before it went through the CEO or whoever of the board, or the city manager, or whomever it was. They dealt with personnel matters until it got to a legal action.
No, and that is right. I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Law is the chief appraiser. Mr. Law is responsible for managing and overseeing the employees of the appraisal district. This board manages and oversees Mr. Law. And so if this board was going to take some sort of action against an individual employee of the appraisal district, you would probably get some advice from me that told you that you were stepping outside of your lane
Yeah, I think
and
we
that
all
was not
understand.
proper for you to do that. However, you do manage the chief appraiser. And so if what you want is you would like for the chief appraiser to come and explain to you things that are happening in the appraisal district and how he is handling it and dealing with it, I think it is appropriate to have him give you that type of explanation and answer any questions that y'all have. At the end of the day, any action that's taken though against an individual employee of this district, if there is any, is gonna be something that Mr. Law is gonna
That's Mr.
decide.
Law. Okay, I think the thing that I was trying to say is that in the executive session, we would discuss whether TAD appraisal district was involved, what involvement do we have? Because we haven't seen it, there may be some things we don't know, and in an executive session that we could talk about, if there is an employee of TAD that did this, complaint about, sent it into the licensing board. How does that involve the board? And there may be some connection, and if so, that's what I think we need to know. I'm not talking about any, Mr. Law he's in charge of all the employees, that's his job, not ours, and we know that. So, but that's not my question, or my concern. Yes, sir.
So may I just suggest that rather than say we are having an executive session, because we don't know if we need one for this, at this point, can we direct the chief appraiser to investigate this matter and report it to us? And then, within a reasonable amount of time, so Mr. Crouch has an answer to his question, and so that we truly address this issue, research it, figure out, does it have anything to do with us, and then make a recommendation to our chair. Yes, there is this matter is going to involve an employee, or no, this matter is between Mr. Crouch and the licensing department, and it really has nothing to do with us. We only discuss it. Let him know what you find out, and that's it. I mean, I think let him look at it, because I don't know anything about it. I don't know if it is a personal issue or not at this point.
If I could clarify a few things with Mr. Crouch. Was it a complaint or a series of complaints?
Series of complaints.
Do you know how many?
Give me just 1 second.
Order of magnitude, 5?
1, 2, 3, 4 that I know of. May I add, I got an email on July, I got an email on November 9th, 2021 from the TDLR investigator. When I asked him who filed the complaint, his response was, I quote, "Mr. Crouch, the complaint was filed by the Tarrant Appraisal District." So what he said, he's saying, he was making assertions about who filed this complaint, but based on what evidence? I've come here today because my name was on the agenda, and I've got plenty of documentation to show Mr. Law's involvement and the involvement of the Tarrant Appraisal District far beyond whether or not there's an employee issue. I think that is certainly a concern, but I understand the responsibilities of the board, and I plan to stay focused on this.
Were the complaints signed by the individual making them?
Yes,
And is that, so there's a name on it?
there is a name,
And what is that name?
Randy Armstrong.
Was there a title on it?
Yes.
What was that?
Give me a second, I can show you if you'd like.
No, we're good.
Let me just.
You can just read it.
Okay, well, I've got to get it out real quick.
While he's doing that, another question to the attorney, is this setting up a precedent for all actions for staff to be brought to this board? So every single staff action is going to be brought to us in the future. And so we're going to be taking action on every staff item instead of it going to the chief appraiser.
No, that's not what we're talking about. And we're
I
not
don't know
presuming
what-
to do that.
Yeah.
We are looking at how is this case done,
Oh.
and who signed it, and in what authority. And
I'm just wondering if Jeff Law's name on this. Okay.
It's not.
I can give, well, I can give you an email with Jeff Love's name on it. And I can give you an open record request showing that nobody filed an open record request to get this information publicly. So that implicates to me that they're in president.
Okay. So.
And I can show a whole bunch of
If
inaction.
I can just finish my few questions here. At this point, Randy Armstrong appears to have filed, looks like four complaints. And what is the nature of the complaints? Or is that?
That's, I'm sorry. Was it a question directed to me?
Yeah.
That's a question that I can certainly answer. I would be a little bit concerned if the appraisal district didn't know the answer to that question. So I would be curious to know, do you know the nature of the complaints?
I do not. I have not seen the complaints. This is the first time that I've actually seen a portion of the complaint.
Okay. So, and I'm looking at one of the complaints. It says Randall C. Armstrong is the name company. Here's Karen Cat. So that answers some of the questions.
That answer, that's what I was trying to get at, that there is a possibility that the appraisal district is involved in this, and
What
that may.
I would suggest, and Matthew, if you listen carefully to what I'm saying, I don't want to cross any lines here, and advise me if I'm getting outside. We got 2 months till the next meeting. Mr. Pompa suggested that Jeff Law do an investigation. I think probably ought to be personally involved for that. Find out what happened, and maybe Chandler and Randy can get together and work this out.
I don't think you've said anything that is improper to talk under this agenda item. The only thing I would point out is that the way your agenda is set up, under number 6, you have action items. Under number 7, you have discussion items. And this particular item is listed as a discussion item. And so, you and Mr. Pompa, you've certainly expressed your individual desires of what you'd like the chief appraiser to do. Unfortunately, I don't think the way it's posted, you all could take a vote and say, we're gonna instruct the chief appraiser to investigate it,
But we can talk, right? And
Yes.
suggestions can be made that aren't voted on that might.
Right, that is correct.
Right, okay.
Well, what about the issue of the executive session for the next board meeting? Do we just wait?
So-
Or do we wait during this 2 months, and maybe it would be posted later? If we could decide later?
So,
Do that?
the policy that y'all just passed earlier today, had in it some detailed provisions as to how you put something on an agenda.
I read that.
And you have the right to put it on the agenda.
Okay.
And so, if what you wanted to do was have you as the board chair, visit with Mr. Law, when it comes time to set up the next agenda, if he has learned more about the circumstances behind it between now and then, and you think that it is an appropriate item to put on for executive session at that point in time,
Okay.
and under those policies, you can go ahead and
Okay.
put that on.
I think that's it.
Question for the
Okay.
chief appraiser too. Also, Chandler, you had your hand up, is there something else you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to cover real quick what I handed to you, because you asked a question, I gave you some documents, I didn't really explain what you got. So,
Briefly, if you can, I think we're going to be talking about this possibly the next meeting.
you got it. Well, we've got the packet that has several more papers. It shows very clearly that if you just turn to the very back page, you can see this is an envelope that the complaint was mailed in. You got a tracking number up here. The tracking number is listed in the body of one of the complaints. It's no doubt the envelope that carried the complaint. And in the top left corner, the return address is listed as the Tarrant Appraisal District with the Tarrant Appraisal District address. And so I've omitted all the other details of the complaint to just focus on who filed the complaint. The next thing that I want to mention is the single sheet of paper that I handed out was an email that as soon as I got that email from the investigator saying that this was filed under the Tarrant County Appraisal, by the Tarrant Appraisal District, I was in complete disbelief because the complaint appears bogus. It's so crazy. And so I've enjoyed a good relationship with Mr. Law, so I thought, I'm just gonna email him and say, hey, do you know about this complaint? He replies back and says, no, he doesn't. And I believed him on November 10th of 2021. The reason why I gave you this email is because on November 10th of 2021, he was made aware of the fact that a complaint was filed against me, appearing to be the Tarrant Appraisal District, and if I was in charge of an organization, I might ask around the offices to just say, hey, does anybody know anything about this complaint? And I've given it plenty of time and remained very silent for many, many months. To me, the lack of action on this implicates the Tarrant Appraisal District, and we might want to say that the actions were taken separately, but there's been nothing happened to separate the complaint from the Tarrant Appraisal District. It's Tarrant Appraisal District information all over these pages, and there's no separation that's happened. So to me, the lack of action shows that there's some amount of, if you see something wrong that's happened, you do nothing about it, what does that say about how much you agree or disagree with it? So for that reason, I believe that we have a discussion about Mr. Law and the Tarrant Appraisal District as a whole, and not just Mr. Armstrong.
Madam Chair, thank you for that platitude. I want to ask the Chief Appraiser, Jeff, if the route of you doing an investigation, if there's anything about that that you cannot do, or obviously have to step carefully in the situation that you get to the bottom of it.
I would like, I'd be happy to try to get to the bottom of it. When
You
I
could also address the email.
Yeah, when Mr. Crouch sent me the email back on November the 10th, I was 100% honest in my response that no, the Tarrant Appraisal District did not file any kind of complaint against you. I was unaware of any complaint filed against you, and I had not ever seen any of the complaints filed against you. I did ask around after the fact about a complaint, and I did learn about a complaint that had been filed. And it was Mr. Armstrong that had filed a complaint. It was my understanding at that particular time that Mr. Armstrong had filed a complaint solely on his own as an individual. It wasn't until, I guess, the public information request that we started getting in not long ago that I discovered that actually, as you pointed out, that the envelope was signed, had our address. That was the first that I knew anything about that. It was also the first time that I had learned when the public information requests were being made and the data, the information, the packets started coming to us, that it was actually signed, Randall Armstrong, Director of Residential Appraisal. That was the first time that I had learned anything about that. I did not direct Mr. Armstrong to file a complaint against you. That was something that was a choice that he had made all on his own. But I don't think that the Tarrant Appraisal District should be implicated in this. It was action, I think, that he had taken, not us as an entity. And again, I will say from here forward, I never directed him to go file a complaint against you. I agree. I think we've had a good relationship, and I want us to maintain that relationship. So,
when did you find out
about the complaint? Well, it was after you sent this email.
Okay. And it's been quite some time.
Right.
Just a moment, I think Mr. Martinez would like to speak.
I have a quick question for you, Chandler, if you don't mind. If I get out of line, just let me know. Just stop me quick. So I know, you and I are both realtors, and, anytime that the complaint is filed with the track, they, of course, they definitely look into it, and there's a hearing set. So just on the timeline wise, or be under any kind of timeline with TDLR, or?
They have not seen it to be of a great concern.
Okay, that's all I need.
So if the investigator's sick or something, it's just been on the back burner for them, as far as I can tell, I'm not sure. The merits of the complaint, for anybody that's seen it, have not been.
Right, because I know I've heard with track or something that's like that, start setting up timelines for it. So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, just so you'll also know, I still have not read the complaint, and I have not, other than fulfilling a public information request, I have not read or gone through the complaint again. I believe it was Mr. Armstrong enjoys, as you said here, a First Amendment right to do what he wants. And so it's my understanding that he was doing this on his own accord through his right as a citizen to do what he felt was necessary.
If you,
Turn in
if
your
you
badge
look
and go
at the
home,
document
then.
that's saying,
You've not been asked a question. I think this is obviously a personnel matter, and it's obviously gonna go to a executive session to address the issue of an employee utilizing county resources or the district resources for personal purposes, I think. And so I think at this point, I don't have any more questions, and I think we need to just say that we're gonna go into executive session next meeting.
Okay,
Can't
that's what I was
We have an issue, we
suggesting, and I
understand
had
He just
it.
said you
We
can't
so
though.
now we're
thought that this really was, that's where we were gonna go.
Yeah,
That's
I
where
think
we
so.
need to go to have this discussion.
Just
And
said you
it's not
can't.
about, you know, what happens with person, that's, there's a division, but this
But there's a
involves
policy
this-
behind it, too.
There's a
There's
policy,
some
yeah.
policy issues behind
But
it, too,
this
that we're
does
going to address.
include, as you heard from Mr. Trout and all the information that we have now, that the appraisal district is involved in this. And we don't know to what, but with our attorney, we will be here for our executive session. Yes, okay.
Probably.
Yeah, all right, so I think, Mr. Crouch, I know you have more to say, and,
one question.
okay, ask it.
Does the lack of action since November 22nd that he learned about this change add one note more level about Mr. Law's action concerning this issue? Does that concern the board at all?
That will be discussed in executive session under personnel matters.
Fair enough.
I think it
That's,
is
yes,
informative.
yes.
If I can say that, I think it is informative, while we don't know all the facts yet, and all the perceptions.
We will discuss it then.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you.
And so, I don't have any questions here, but I do want to encourage the positive relationship between our chief appraiser and Chandler. Chandler has been,
You just need one more?
Well, I just want to say, the only interaction that I've had with anybody in this whole matter, not one phone call, not one anything, was from the TDLR investigators. Nobody said anything to me about, in the email I sent to Mr. Law back on November 22nd. So I agree with your sentiment, and I will restrain myself.
yeah. So, but I think it would be useful to get to the bottom of what happened and its legitimacy.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do. That's where we want to go with this.
Do we need a motion?
No, this is just a discussion, but it can come under future agenda items, and I will put that on myself, because I did initiate it, and I do think it's necessary. So I thank you all for, taking this and seeing it as an issue that could be hopefully settled there. Sir, do you have a question?
No, I have 2 minutes on this subject. I signed up
He
for 2
reserved
minutes
time.
on this subject.
That's
Yes,
crazy.
reserve time if there is public comments.
Okay,
Round of time?
I guess it is.
Wow.
Wait, let us get the timer. Hey.
That's perfect.
The chair makes the decision in this purpose.
Which is good.
Our attorney was just shaking his head, so I was just,
That's not an
we paid the guy a
employee.
lot of money to.
Get a refund.
You don't pay me that
much.
Let me know when I have the floor, Ms. Burton.
Pardon?
Let me know when I have the floor. Thank
I
you.
will let you learn.
The chair lets you know, I was
Right.
just.
Go.
Thank you. So it's clear that the Tarrant the Tarrant Appraisal District has agency because it happened on company time, on the clock, using organizational resources. The deeper question on this specific agenda item, which is actually about depriving Mr. Crouch's First Amendment rights of free speech. So you're right, Mr. Pompa, there's a lot of things that you don't discuss here, but I just watched a 15-minute discussion about the deprivation of this gentleman's First Amendment free speech rights and his ability to do business. My second point is, the organization at some level has known this since November. Mr. Law knew on some level something about this. His staff put it on the agenda. What kind of a staff that we pay millions of dollars to would not provide the board members with the exact documents related to this very sensitive subject? You try to characterize this as a personnel matter when it is clearly a conspiracy at this point. You may not like that, but I'm going to give you a parallel example. The staff apparently does this all the time, and this is only the second day I've been here. On this agenda, on the back of this agenda, which was filed on June the 3rd, stamped by the county clerk, are the new rules for public comment. the public comment that you just voted on and adopted. So the staff preemptively put the wrong rules on this document. It is a shell game, and they constantly keep you uninformed, underinformed, omit documents or information. The gravity of the situation, Mr. Crouch should not have gotten to this level. The looks on your faces when you discovered that the complaint clearly was from Mr. Armstrong. The public and the media still don't know if Mr. Armstrong is even in the room right now. The fact is that if Mr. Armstrong is in the room and he didn't speak up, he should be terminated immediately. Separately, I believe that Mr. Law and a number of his staff had conversations about this prior to this board meeting today.
Thank you. And we'll move on.
Of course.
We're now down to the ARB Chairman's report.
No, sorry.
What?
My report is that we have 60 members as of now, and everything seems to be going pretty well. We had a new secretary appointed Monday from the Judge Gallagher. We had one resign, so we put into place Nancy Sharp.
Okay. Thank you, Will. I know you guys are busy. How about our taxpayer liaison officer report?
I'm going to be here, but she's unable to make it.
She was unable to make, okay, good. And we are now with the chief appraiser's report.
Yeah.
Update.
Yeah, it's just an update on kind of our 2022 appraisal process, and I'll try to keep this short. I'll add to Ms. Mahoney's report. We've had a little over 170,000 protests filed. Give you a little context with that. Last year we had about 156,000 protests filed. Harris County, who usually has between 300 and 400,000 protests filed, they've had over 500,000 protests filed this year. Dallas County, at the time we heard, had over 190,000 protests filed. They generally have around the 170,000 range. Denton County is now at 120,000 protests, and I think, weren't they generally below 100,000 normally? Yeah, so they're everyone that we've talked to in the appraisal district world is seeing an increase in protests this year. It's obviously a result of property values going up all across the state. We're working really, really hard to resolve those protests. I mean, you can see as you came in, we have a lot of appraisers working at the front counter trying to resolve protests even before the property owner goes into a hearing. And we're making a lot of headway there. We're also working with agents. Mr. Crouch, I think, would even admit that we're trying to work with him and his protests being filed, trying to see where there's common ground. We've worked with a lot of agents where there's areas where we can make some adjustments on these values. Property owners are coming in and having their hearings. The single panel hearings that we're having, the legislature put in a new rule where if a property owner chooses, they can go into a single member panel. I should explain, generally our panels are made up of 3 members, but now some of them are coming in and just going before one person, kind of like an arbitration style meeting. And I'm hearing that those are going really well. Actually, they're going a little bit faster because the single member deliberates with himself, and certainly it doesn't take as long to deliberate with yourself as it does 2 other people. So those are working out well. I've already said we're going to be sending the budget to the taxing units on June 15th. We will be having our budget hearing in August, and we will also have an action item on that meeting to adopt the budget if there's not any changes or any other concerns there. So with that, I will hush up and turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the good report. Well, now we are down to item 11, and that's the future agenda items and set the next day. I would like to suggest that we will put on the agenda for the executive meeting on that day.
I've already made enough of that.
You've made enough, okay, so it will be on there, and we'll discuss it then, that item that we've been talking about.
Can I add to that Mr. Crouch needs to be invited?
Normally, I'm not sure.
You just said you could.
Maybe not for the whole meeting, is that? Mr.
No, just
Jeff?
for the part related to
Well, the whole thing's basic, well, not completely, you're right.
there are the other items on the executive session, obviously not, but for the part that involves Mr. Crouch, who's listed on the agenda this month, I think it'd be appropriate for him to have.
Well, I don't, as said, I don't know that that would be appropriate at that time. Rather than make the statement that, I mean, any other board members have anything to say about that? Because I would rather wait on that.
Yeah, I don't think we want to say that.
I don't think we
publicly here,
want
that
to
we're gonna
say
do
that.
Because Mr. Law is gonna do his investigation,
Yeah.
and then we'll determine what that's gonna look like. And if it's appropriate, and the chair thinks it's appropriate for
Yeah.
Mr. Crouch to come out and speak, I think it'd be great, but.
But we've got 2 months in
necessarily
between
want to
this time, and I think there's some things that could happen and that would not be necessary nor, so rather
A
than
lot can
state
happen
now.
between now and the next meeting, but the request has been made, and I think it would be appropriate
Well,
if we get
I'm
to
not
that.
sure
point.
that, personally, I'm not ready to say, yes, I'm going to make that invitation available right now. Because I think with what we get from Mr. Law and for what we're going to discuss in here, to say that right now, and we don't, as you say, we got 2 months, we don't know exactly what else is going to happen. But rather than make that invitation open right now, I don't think so.
I can't imagine a situation where we have a closed door hearing with an employee without, in this case, without Mr. Crouch being invited. I think it's a matter of transparency and openness
Well,
that I think we need to reflect. And if
I think that meeting could be after our executive session. That possibly, if it goes to that extent, then Mr. Tepper and the board and Mr. Crouch, Mr. Hill, that could possibly be another meeting.
I think the purpose of the executive session is for Mr. Law to report his findings and his actions to correct any missteps in this process. Because Mr. Law is our authority, not Mr. Armstrong or Mr. Crouch. So our direction is to have an executive session for Mr. Law to report his findings. And that may entail meeting with Mr. Crouch.
Yeah, we can decide that later.
Yes.
I think if Mr. Armstrong is going to be in the meeting, Chandler is the attorney also should be invited. And if we don't decide that now, it's okay with me.
Good.
But my intent's on the record.
Yes, I know, and I heard it. It's just that I think that we have some other things to do first, and when you go ahead and make that invitation now, it's premature.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
It doesn't mean that we won't.
No.
If it's appropriate.
No.
But-
We want to get this
Yeah.
settled, and we want it
Well, I think what we've heard is, the
amiable.
board didn't know anything about this.
No.
Pretty clear. I can tell you for sure, I didn't know anything about this, other than the letter from Frank Hill. You've heard us now instruct the chief appraiser to look into it, investigate it, get us all the information that is appropriate, and we'll address it, we'll deal with it. But we haven't done anything with it because we didn't know anything about it.
This will be a discussion for the board to decide what our position is and where we are and how we're involved. And we will be discussing that with Mr. Law and our attorney. So I don't think at this particular time that we would go ahead and make an invitation to have Mr. Hill and Mr. Crouch in that meeting, because it is for the board to discuss and decide what our proposal or what we decide to do.
And we can decide that at a later time.
Yeah, okay? And when we come out, hopefully we'll get all this settled and get through it. Okay, Mr. Crouch? You're looking at me, okay?
Hope is for positive resolution.
We all.
The most positive possible.
Mr. Tepper, just a question, is there anything from a legal standpoint that prevents Mr. Crouch and Mr. Armstrong from meeting to discuss this, to see if they can come to a resolution?
Not that I'm aware of. I think they're two private individuals. If they choose to have a discussion, then that is within their rights.
Any other discussion? Okay.
August 12th is our next meeting?
Yes, August 12th. Well, I thank you all for your time this morning and being here.
I have one thing, we need to vote. This board has made progress by leaps and bounds on the audio recordings some of the early meetings I was in, I couldn't even hear half of them.
I know.
And now it's very clear who's talking, you can recognize their voice and hear what they're saying. But I'm not opposed to having a video of these meetings as well. As you pointed out, this one's being recorded already.
I know.
And I don't know what's involved administratively or legally in doing that. I don't see anything in our bylaws, our new bylaws about that in particular. But I think it'd be fine.
I think I'm sorry, ma'am. I think that was included in our committee, our subcommittee, that you and I were a part of back a couple of years ago when we implemented the audio. We looked at the costs of that. I know I went over to Dallas and looked at their capabilities as well, and the audio was the available medium that we added at that point in time. And I think at that point in time, we didn't seek to add video, but I think that we could look at that in the
It'll be
future.
our big showbiz break.
Well,
Showbiz
since
break.
we are talking about future agenda items, you can request to put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
We can have a presentation from
That's
staff.
what I was
Add
saying.
more to
Yeah.
the large budget.
Would you put that on as an agenda item?
I'd be willing to
Yeah.
consider a presentation on that and, you know, what the logistics of that is. We keep moving rooms, so we have to settle on a room.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother, that's another
And a
thing
whole
at some point in
RFP.
time.
Yeah, and
that
so,
I
but
would like
yeah,
to talk
I think
about
it'd be
facilities.
worth a presentation from the staff on looking into that.
Yeah.
I'd support that.
Yeah, okay, everybody.
Bid process.
Did we get a report on that? Okay, good. Any others?
Good.
Okay. Then, so we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for what you said. Don't mess up your nails.
Sorry, I didn't know anything about it before.
No, I purposely just talking about it. I just, yeah.